Good afternoon. Everybody hear me? How's the mic? I usually don't use a mic. I just talk and people hear me. My name is Marc Aronson. I'm with the Pennsylvania Association of Notaries based in Pittsburgh. I just recently started my, 52nd year. Still looking for a good job. If anybody has one, let me know. So I just keep on coming back and do the same old thing. Years ago, I actually gave classes in Maryland. Long before they were an option, 25 or so years ago, I came down here and wandered around these community colleges for a while, giving some 6-hour notary classes. That's 6 hours of me talking. So if you think 1 hour is too much today, just imagine listening to me talk for 6 hours. It's a really long day, I can tell you. So I've been to Maryland before. Actually, I spent three trips to the Secretary of State's office, excuse me. Every time they changed the secretary, I had to go back in and tell them what I told them before, because he had new staff. In those days, I was talking to them about the advent of electronic signatures and talking to them about electronic notarization. And I could spend the next 6 hours talking about that too, if you want. I was Pennsylvania's first electronic notary on January 30th, 2006, if I remember correctly. Not because I'm so smart or good looking or anything, just because it was politically correct to appoint me. So somebody appointed me as the first electronic notary. And of course, we're now talking about Ron, which is a whole other story, another can of worms. Pennsylvania was our early leader. We did the first recording of documents in the public record at the Recorder of Deeds office in Lancaster County, using 2 notaries from Maryland who were doing electronic notarizations, which was kind of interesting because when I called the Secretary of State's office here and said, "Hey, that's really cool, you're doing electronic notarization," and some nice lady who was just doing her job said, "Electronic what?" I said, "Electronic notarization. I'd like to talk about your program." And she said, "What program?" Just never mind. So anyway, little sidebar here. So I did bring, I have a whole book of notes here. I am going to read the notes once in a while. I'd rather read these notes than miss something I'm going to say. As I drive back tonight, back home again, I'm going to be whapping my head against the window going, "Oh, I should have said this or I should have said that." So I will take a look at the notes. And I was assigned by our leader here, wherever she went, to talk about certain things. And she told me that we would have notaries public here from Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. So I took a look at those 3 laws, although I'm going to talk a little bit at a higher level, not just specifically about these 3 states or 2 states in the district, but what goes on around the country also. I need to say, remind myself here, I'm not a lawyer. I get accused of being one sometimes, only because of Mr. Brooks and his brothers that I buy clothes from once in a while. But so I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a technologist. I've learned how to spell PKI, OCR, and XML. So they got 17 more letters to go. I have the whole alphabet done. That took 23 years, I can tell you. I'm not a signing agent. I know there are some folks in the room who are signing agents. I know something about it, enough to be dangerous. We don't give classes in our association to become signing agents. My corporate lawyer said that we would be teaching law and we shouldn't do that. Yeah, it turns out that we probably would not have been doing it, but who am I to argue with my corporate lawyer? So those are a few things. Otherwise, I'll talk about a few other bits and pieces here as the day goes on. Let me see if I can make this toy work. Point it this way, I guess. Cool. So this is the agenda that I was given. I'm supposed to talk about notary misconduct. I could spend a lot of time doing that. I have some stories for you, responsibilities, penalties, some gray areas. If it wasn't for gray areas, I wouldn't have a job when it comes to notary. We answer 100 or 200 phone calls a day, 30,000 plus phone calls last year at our office from members of our association on how to do their job as a notary public, how to become a notary public, how to get reappointed as a notary public. And in Pennsylvania, you have to go to a notary public to transfer ownership of your motor vehicle, as I think you do maybe here in Maryland perhaps, and a few other states around the country. There's only about 8 states left now that require the services of a notary to transfer ownership of a motor vehicle title. Last week, I was at the world headquarters of Carvana. Heard of Carvana, the guys with the funny elevator stores and so forth, because we were talking about, for a few days, transferring motor vehicle titles electronically. So why do we have a piece of paper for a title now? Why can't we do it electronically? You know, it'll eventually happen. It's starting to happen in a few states, Arizona, Texas, and a few other places. California wants to put them on a blockchain. Jeez, there's another story we could talk about for an hour or so. The notary world is very interesting. When I used to teach 6-hour classes in Pennsylvania, long before the classes were required, and I would rattle on for 6 hours at a time, I would get up and say to the audience that notaries are involved in your life from the day you're born to the day you die and after you die. And then I could spend the rest of the day then talking about all those examples. And it still hasn't changed. It's an interesting business to be in. I have to know a little bit about a lot of different things because notaries public are involved in many different aspects of your life or the life of your constituency, even though they might only see a notary maybe once a year if they're lucky. But that one time they see you, you need to know what you're doing and be able to help them. We'll talk about legal issues, education, some case studies perhaps, and sure about that final assessment thing. That was something that I think that our hostess has to do because I have nothing to say about that. Let's see, next on the, still can't figure out which way to, there we go, like that I guess. Okay, cool. Understanding the consequences of misconduct. Gee, again, if it wasn't for misconduct, I wouldn't have a job. We'll talk later on about notary bond and about liability insurance because in my state it's required. In about half the states, the notaries are required to have bonds. The E&O, liability insurance, is a option with a few strange exceptions. Florida for remote online notaries and one other place I don't remember at the moment. But generally it's optional. 50% of our members purchase it and, well, 50% don't. And we'll talk about some of that and how it works. I can answer questions if you want. You are an appointed state official. You're appointed state official mostly by secretaries of state across the country. There are some exceptions. New Jersey did it by the Department of Revenue for years, and the banking department in Wisconsin does it. That's an old political story. And there's a few other places where the Secretary of State does not appoint you, but generally they're appointed by the Secretary of State. 80%, 75 to 80% of our members are notaries public, not because they want to be, because they have to be, because they come to work for somebody like me who says, you are going to be the notary. You're not going to get paid anymore, but you're going to work harder. Thank you very much. Okie doke. So I know the majority of our members are working for an employer, and that's a bit of an issue because you have to follow the law of the land. You have to follow perhaps regulations. Sometimes you follow administrative fiat, which is posted to the state appointed authority's website. And then, of course, you have your employer, who obviously knows more than you ever will if you live to be 138. Ask them, they'll tell you. And I'm an employer, so I can make snide comments like that because I'm the best employer anybody ever had. I'll be glad to tell you that. So we'll talk about some of the issues that you might have with your employer. We talk about here a few things about misconduct. We'll talk various cases and problems with misconduct as I go through this. But as the screen says, I'm not going to read all of it to you, but if you don't behave yourself, it erodes public trust. You are that independent third party that the public can trust because you can't trust each other, you can't trust your relatives especially, you can't trust your employer, the perfect stranger who walks through the door, but hopefully you could trust your local notary who has no dog in the fight, if you will, in the transaction. In fact, they can't have one. That violates another law. And you can trust them because they behave themselves well, they're educated, they understand what your problems are and appreciate it. If you are subject to some misconduct, there can be litigation. Can you afford to pay for that litigation? And I have some E&O and bond cases I'll try to squeeze into my short period of time here today about that. But I just had a case yesterday. The short version was, and for the few lawyers in the room, you'll appreciate this, that the notary who's in trouble is also a title insurance agent, by the way. They offered to subrogate, to let us subrogate the responsibility to the association. Look, I've been doing this for 51 years. That's the first time I ever had a member say that we should pay for their problems, they shouldn't pay for their own problems. And I sent that to our underwriter, who said, that's the strangest question I ever had. And so we're going to politely refuse and say, no, thank you. As a notary public, something else I've always said when I taught our classes is you're only responsible for your actions just for the rest of your life. That's all. Just be on. I'm not being funny here. Claims against notaries public, in my experience, don't happen tomorrow. You notarized something yesterday, they happen tomorrow? Nah. 3 months from now? Probably not. In my experience, and different folks have different experiences now, but for me, 3 years, 5, 7, 13, and I am not making this up. I have had an old Boy Scout now, I won't lie to you. I have had 3 claims 27 years after the transaction. Now you might say, well, you know, what about a statute of limitations? I don't know what the statute is here in Maryland, Virginia, or the district, but in Pennsylvania, documents under seal is 20 years. Where are you going to find the notary after 20 years? What can he or she remember 20 years later? Do they still have their journal? If it's a Ron video, do they still have that video, which at the moment, generally there's a 10-year requirement around the country to keep the video. Can you find something you recorded electronically on a, I don't know, what it used to be called? Oh, tape recorders, that's right. Can you find that tape recording 10 years from now that you did 10 years? Nah, good luck with that. And where do you keep your CDs, by the way? Anyway, so litigation, expensive, and you're probably going to lose. And by the way, is your employer going to pay for that? What's his name, her name? Are they still in business? Did they get absorbed by another bank? Did they go bankrupt? Are they around anymore? You're responsible for the rest of your life. You might just have to hire an attorney, and he or she might have to write a letter to say the statute of limitations has expired, or for some other reason that they're barking up the wrong tree at this stage of the game. But you're the one who's going to pay that $200, have the lawyer write the letter, not your employer. Not your employer. They're not going to care. Misconduct exposes you to administrative, civil, and criminal. And I'm going to read a little list I have here later on, and try to get some time, of some of the typical types of administrative penalties that you might see as a notary public. Personal financial loss. So we'll talk about bond and E&O. You are responsible to your full net worth. So you work for me, and I'm paying you about $1.98 a month. You say, I'm just an old notary, right? I don't have a lot of money. I can't pay you back for your loss. I'm sorry. You will be sorry indeed. You are responsible if you cause the loss. Sometimes your employer can be held liable. There's the most famous case out of this was actually out of Illinois, Kentera versus somebody whose name I can't pronounce, but they worked for Kinko's at the time. Initially, the case said that the employer was responsible because they failed to give the proper education to the notary. That was appealed, and it was overthrown on an appeal. Nevertheless, the employer still can be held, because if I'm the aggrieved party, if I'm the one who's been caused that financial harm, I am going to sue everybody in sight, right? I'm going to sue the the notary. I'm going to sue the employer, that's what I meant to say, because who has the deeper pockets? Not the poor old notary who's getting paid $1.98 a month, but your employer. Hey, they're rich, right? All of them are. And so I'm going to sue the employer because that's where the money is, and that's where I'm going to go chasing it. The notary acts under your direction. I understand that. I am an employer, but the employer has to understand that you act under a law or regulations or other direction, a handbook, whatever it might be, from your state, and they just can't make these things up. I think that's probably the end of that one. One other case I'll talk about just briefly. There was a remote online notary case, where when the lawsuit showed up, the vendor was sued because they said on their website in big, bold letters, well, the best vendor you ever had. And by the way, we provide that notary with wonderful 5-star education. So when they're a raw notary, they'll always do everything correct. Turned out their education wasn't worth a hoot, and the notary did not do everything correct. So be careful what you say when you advertise on your website about how wonderful you are, because a good lawyer can use that against you. So be careful out there, as they used to say on TV. There we go. Here's some terms that even I have not used in many years, but just to get down to the core of the way the legal world talks. Misfeasance, malfeasance, and nonfeasance. I don't think you'll see those words in any notary law anywhere. Something I was taught about 50 years ago or so now by the fellow who taught me about some things I think I know right now. Misfeasance. If you fail to perform your duties correctly, you know what they are, but you just don't do them properly. Malfeasance. If you intentionally don't do it, you know you're supposed to take identification from that gentleman's wife who came in with him. Of course, it's his girlfriend's not really his wife, and you didn't do it, and now you're in trouble because you didn't take the identification. And nonfeasance, failure to perform an act which is required by law. Probably the last time I'll use those words, because you won't hear them very often unless you maybe go to court, and the lawyer for the other side thinks that they need to talk like this. What things go wrong? What problems do you have? The commission application that you filled out to become a notary public, you could have put fraudulent information in there, and sometimes that happens. Does anybody check those commissions, by the way, those applications at the state level when they go to the Secretary of State's office or the state appointing authority's office? Who's doing a background check on you? Anybody? No, not very often. No background checks. Actually, Pennsylvania passed a law to do that. Oh my gosh, at least a half a dozen or so years ago. The state still doesn't do it. They haven't got around to it. You know, they got better things to do. They may do it someday, but not this day. Failure to comply with the state notary law. Failure to discharge the duties of your office. Perhaps you were convicted of a felony and you got your seat, but you didn't tell the state that. Now you're appointed as a notary. We don't make felons notaries public in our state nor more states. Advertising a duty or right or privilege you don't have. Two things I'll bring up off the top of my head. One is acting as an immigration consultant. Now that's a sort of a formal, sexy title, if you will, but there's a lot of new immigrants to our country. It changes all of the time, and they come to a notary because, I'll get this out of the way now, that in the rest of the world, if you're a notary public, you're pretty much a lawyer or something close to being a lawyer. I mean, years ago, I had to make a long trip to Hawaii, a real pain in the neck, you know. Hey, it's work, you know. I do what I can to serve my members, and I had to go to Hawaii because I went to a conference, and the conference was, I'm not making this up, it was the college, official title, the College of Australian and New Zealand Notaries. Really interesting 3-day presentation, and these are folks who become lawyers. They then are lawyers for a while. They then take a course to become a notary. They then serve an apprenticeship. They then appear before a 3-judge panel to be queried and see if they are approved, and then they become a notary public. You're talking about a 20-year process here. So in the rest of the world, a notary is a big deal. In this country, it doesn't sound nice now, but I'm a notary, so I could talk this way. If you could fog a mirror, you could be a notary. Well, I'm sorry, but unfortunately, a lot of people think that way. And sometimes I've run across some folks that have made some pretty foggy mirrors, I can tell you. So new immigrants coming to this country don't understand you don't have the same privileges and rights and authority and education that notaries public have in the rest of the world. So that is one of the things. The other, which we'll talk about later, is acting as an attorney, what's called UPL, unauthorized practice of law, and that's another thing which we'll talk about. In Maryland and the district, you have a notary law. It's called RULONA, the Revised Uniform Law on Notarial Acts. Virginia does not have that law. About 25 states have it around the country now, and that's my fault. Because I woke up one day, I'm not being funny, woke up one day in November of 2005, and I realized that the uniform law that we had in this country did not address the electronic age. It was passed in 1982. It didn't address the electronic age, and we're getting all this new electronic stuff, kind of cool. And so I got a hold of a group called the Uniform Law Commission, a group that I worked with before. It's a group of lawyers from around the country, and judges and so forth. And I said, we need to change the law. 5 years later, we had a new law. Seems like it took a long time, but that's just the normal process through their system. And now about 25 states have RULONA. So we have sort of kind of uniform laws, because every state that adopts a uniform law, I don't care whether it's Rolona or the uniform UCC law or a bunch of other laws out there now. We have a uniform will law, electronic will law also. But every state makes little changes to them. But at their core, it's the same information. And we'll talk about some of that information today. And if you don't like your law, you could throw a stone at me, because it's probably my fault, because I had an idea. Well, in the shower one morning, try not to think about that too much, but in the shower one morning, I had an idea, and we did it. Kind of cool. Okay. Problems that notaries public have or create for themselves, perhaps. Failure to have the signer appear in person. Jeez, there is no excuse. Look, they have to be there. If the person can't come to you, you can go to them. And now, of course, you have the mysterious and wonderful remote online notary process, which is another 6-hour conversation. But this is, no matter what state, and if you talk to other notary vendors, there's another association based in California, there's one in Florida, there's 2 brothers who own one in Texas, not too many of them out there. But we all teach notary classes, we've been doing it for years, and we all take care of claims against notaries. And there's a few things which always happen, and they're on the screen. The customer fails to appear. And so I show up right here today and I say, I need to swear to something that it's a beautiful day near Washington, D.C., or wherever I am right now, because I can swear that. And my lovely, long-suffering fiance, she swears that it's a beautiful day also, but she can't be here today, right? She's at home doing something for her grandchild, I think, or children or something, whatever she's doing. But, it's me. I wouldn't lie to you, right? I'm an old notary, an old Boy Scout, and all that kind of stuff. Would I lie to you? But here, I had her sign before I left. Here's a piece of paper. Judith Ann wouldn't, she's a nice lady. She would never lie. Besides, she's my fiance. Do I trust her? You should trust her also. You would say, somebody out there I was thinking, like, really? You've been engaged for 25 years? Yeah, well, that's another story. It's actually a technically interesting story. Pennsylvania, some years ago, back in 2005, if I remember correctly, January 1st, got rid of what used to be called common law marriages. So some people say, well, if you live with somebody for 7 years, now you're married. Well, not in Pennsylvania any longer. That's important later on when somebody appears in front of you and says, my name is Mark, and by the way, this is my wife, Judy. Is she really my wife? What authority does she have? Legally, what does that mean? So in Pittsburgh, we call this shacking up. So we've been shacking up for 25 years. Not my fault, by the way. She's the one who said yes to the marriage thing, and she's also the one who now says, oh, it's just a piece of paper. Anyway, hey, you know what? She lets me come home. It's her house. I can't complain. She's a good person. But technically, these are important parts. When somebody appears before you, how do you identify them, which we'll get into a little bit of that, and how do you know that she's not my wife? Okay? And people get married now, by the way, and don't necessarily take their husband's name anymore. This is the modern age, right? They take, well, for professional reasons. For example, my son got married to a nice young lady from Canada, and she uses her name because professionally she's a college professor. And so she writes things under her maiden name, and she's not about to change it to my kid's name. I mean, who wants to be an Aronson anyway? So she keeps it the way she's going to keep it. Anyway, failure to appear, failure to identify, which I sort of touched about it a little bit. We'll talk more about this, I think. Impersonating a notary. Really? You got nothing better to do in your life than impersonate a notary public? But there was a young lady here who was talking about deed fraud, and I'm on a committee. I've been on a committee for 2.5 years now in Philadelphia, where there's a whole lot of deed fraud. So I'm in Pittsburgh, which is that side of the state. We've heard of Philadelphia, someplace on the other side. They have a different football team and a baseball team, and we don't really talk about them too much. But there's a lot of deed fraud in Philly and also other big cities, Detroit and Los Angeles and Dallas and other metropolitan areas. That's another conversation. But most of the time, and they'll tell you in Philly, most of the time deed fraud occurs when somebody pretends like they're a notary, not a real notary public. Every once in a while you do get a notary who does something stupid or gets snookered by somebody in doing something stupid. Besides, if you want to be a notary, all you're going to do is what? Go to Staples and buy yourself one of these rubber stamp things, and now you're a notary, right? Jeez, that's another problem which we could talk about. And giving legal advice, as we say on the screen here. We don't give legal advice. And the law actually says that now in Rolona. Whoops, got to change this. I'm changing the paper, but not the screen. There we go. Overview of your role and responsibilities. Only acts that are required by law, authorized by law. There's about 6 core acts around the nation that everybody has, no matter what state you're in. And there's only 2 or 3 of them that really talk about, as we mentioned here on the slide, we talk about oaths or affirmations. Most people still call those things affidavits. And west of the Mississippi River, they used to call them jurats, which made me crazy, because in my world, a jurat is only one part of an affidavit. Anyway, so I try not to use affidavit because I'm not supposed to anymore, but the public is going to ask you for a sworn statement, for an affidavit. And acknowledgments, which are usually used mostly for real property transactions, some powers of attorney, maybe a will, that sort of thing. And then now we do have a sort of a signature thing where you could sign and stamp a piece of paper. But you want personal appearance. You want to make sure that the person who receives this record is satisfied and happy. Somebody asked a question earlier about the acceptance of a document across state lines. So there is in this, there's 2 things to talk about. One is the cliche full faith and credit clause of the Constitution, which says something executed in one state is accepted in another state. I'm not a lawyer, but that's my version. Beyond that, every state also has a law addressing the full faith and credit thing, that whatever's done in one state takes another one. If you need a copy of your law, let me know. I can get it for you. It's not a problem. So it's really not an issue that something which is executed in California could be accepted here in Maryland without question. And besides, if you do have a question, are you going to call California? I'm not being funny now. You want to call the Secretary of State's Office of California, and you're going to say, hey, is Jackie a notary there? She notarized something on July 4th. It just came across my desk. And I'm not going to accept this unless I know that she really is a notary. What's the chance their records are even up to date? What's the chance you get somebody on the phone that can help you? Now, it is true that on many of the Secretary of State's websites now, you can punch in a name and go through a list. But one of the problems is, well, how often is are those lists updated? When the electronic notary stuff started, the golden gift of all of this was we would have a national database. All 4.4 million notaries would be in this database, and if you wanted to check if somebody was a notary, you would ping somebody's database and pay them 10 cents or something, and you would know that Jackie really was a notary in Maryland or some other place. Well, good luck with that. It never happened because, well, sorry, everybody's busy. And appointing notaries public normally is not the most important thing that is done in the Secretary of State's office. There's this little problem about voting. Who cares about voting anyway? And other little problems like that. So it's not uncommon for the records to be behind when somebody changes their name, changes their address, dies, moves, something else, resigns their commission, gets punished. So it's hard to find if a notary really is a notary some days. You maintain a record. Somebody up before talked about journals, and I'll probably mention, in fact, I will mention journals a little bit here in a bit. You deter fraud. It's kind of an old cliche. I'm not sure that you do deter to a degree. I've always had a little bit problem with that speech, but it does help. If you get an independent third party in between 2 fighting relatives, which is a very common example, when somebody dies, here's the common example. Somebody died, right? Dad died, and he leaves everything to his wife, except, of course, it's not his first wife, my mother. It's his second wife, right? The secretary from the office. No, wait, I could talk like that. My father did marry the secretary. Well, no, he didn't marry her. He did date her. And he divorced my mother. So I know this from practical experience. And so what happens when Dad dies? Where does the BMW go and his good wine and all the rest of the stuff? That's right, it went to what's-her-name, who, by the way, didn't even have a driver's license, but she still got the BMW. I'm not being funny. That's a true story. And then you got the 2 kids, myself and Larry and Curly and Mo, all 3 of us, right? And we'll all kicking and screaming and fighting because, Dad left me the BMW and he left me the good bottle of wine. And oh my God, families are a terrible idea. I don't know who invented them, just a terrible idea. When it comes to notaries public, it will cause you a lot of grease. And as people have already said it 2 or 3 times, you now have in Rolona, and generally, even before there was Rolona, we all taught, when in doubt, refuse to serve. You have the ability, right? The dog ate my stamp. I'm not being funny. Dogs do eat stamps. I'm the one that sells these things. I know, I've seen pictures of them, believe me. You're not required. The only problem, of course, you typically have is with your employer who says, oh, but they're one of our customers, and by God, we serve our customers. We have to do this and that. Yeah, well, pal, you know what? Goodbye. I don't need you. I'm responsible for my actions for the rest of my life. This could be a problem. Let's do a little bit about identification just for a second. Some folks have talked about it, but there's 1 or 2 things nobody's mentioned yet, I think. So how do I identify you? Well, I know you. Sir, I know Jackie. Haven't seen her in a while, but I know her. Certainly I know of her reputation anyway. And she shows up in front of me. I see it's Jackie. Fine, I don't need a car. There is an exception to that rule, by the way. California, which is the exception to a lot of rules. They can't actually do the personal identification thing. So if I walk in front of Jackie and she's sitting in California, she knows me, but she still needs my driver's license probably, or some government issued document. You have to be careful the way your law reads. In my state, it says signature or a picture. I can give you my Social Security card. Do we tell our members to take them? Well, you can. Not a really good idea. But other states say signature and a photograph. Every state's a little different, so you have to know your law, which I'm going to talk more about here in a bit, as well as you can. If you don't know them, if you don't have a driver's license as an example, or a passport or something else, what about what's known as a creditable witness? So you work for a lawyer, typical example. You work for the lawyer, you're the underpaid, overworked legal secretary, whatever it is, paralegal and so forth. Lawyer comes in and says, by the way, this is Mark, he's our client, and he needs this, excuse the expression, notarized, and I'm a lawyer, you can take my word for it. That's fine. You know your boss, you know her, you trust her, she says, that's Jackie, fine, life is wonderful. And actually in Pennsylvania, we even have a special law that covers that sort of thing. But here's something we didn't talk about yet. How many of you have your driver's license from Maryland? Anybody? Some of you are from Maryland here, right? Do you have your driver's license on your smartphone yet? No? What? Why not? If I lived here, I'd have my driver's license on a smartphone. They are now putting driver's licenses on smartphones. It's called an MDL, mobile driver's license. Really interesting. Another hour or 2 conversation. I'm sorry, everything I do is an hour or 2 conversation, because it's quite fascinating. We could talk about privacy issues and technology issues, and there's a lot of issues. So I don't have mine yet because it's Pennsylvania and we're pretty slow doing everything. I have a sample, and I could bore you to tears about it. Give me a call. I'd be glad to talk to you about it, or invite me down and I'll buy me lunch. Give me food. Hey, give me food. I came down here, so give me food. I'll talk anywhere. I don't care. But things are changing. And the way notaries public identify people are going to change dramatically over the next 10 years. I think Jackie talked about biometrics. Oh my gosh, I get a biometric newsletter every morning. Really, really interesting. Every part of your human body, everything that you do, your breath, your eyesight, everything can be used to identify you. Everything. And it's really, really fascinating, very interesting. And as a notary public, you're going to see this change over the years. One last example, because I'm going to run really, really late on this, I'm pretty sure. So when I show up in front of you, this is an interesting question. Right now the law says what? I know you, right? Credible witness, or give me a piece of plastic that says you're Marc Aronson or whatever am I. When you look at that driver's license, what do you see? My name, my address, my height, my weight, I don't know, my blood type, whatever it might be, my dog's name, something. A whole bunch of things on the front and the back. What do you really need to see? And this is very interesting because, in my opinion, the notary laws in this country should be changing over the next 10 or 20 years, because this is a terrible cliche, but this is the cliche which is used in the mobile driver's license industry now. What if I'm a young lady and I go to a bar because, I want to go to a bar and have a good time, and there's some guy at the bar who's checking right ages to make sure, and I take a look and go, oh, look, Jackie. Okay, yeah, you look old enough. 123 Main Street. Cool, you can go in. But of course, in the back of my head, I just put, 123 Main Street. That's interesting. And so when Jackie gets home tonight, who's she going to find hiding in the bushes? That's right, me. So this is serious stuff, of course, now. Very serious stuff. So what does the notary need to say? The advantage of a mobile driver's license is that of the 60, I know of at least 60 different data points on a driver's license. And the question is, how many of them do you need to see as a notary? Nobody knows yet, because a notary working in a law firm, what do I need? Do I need the address? Maybe. Do I need her date of birth? Probably not. And there's other points. If I go to the bar, what does that guy need at the bar? Does he need your name? Heck no. He needs your date of birth. He doesn't even need your state or anything. He needs the date of birth. That's pretty much it, all things considered. What if I buy a motor vehicle? What does the dealer need? In my state, as an example, when you buy a motor vehicle, a copy of the driver's license has to go in what we call PennDOT, into our Department of Transportation. So do they get the whole? How are they going to get it when it's electronically? Off of my smartphone. Going to be interesting. Anyway, identity is changing. You have to follow your law, not what your employer wants some days. And there is the whole problem of what's called PII, personally identifiable information. All of this data on the driver's license identifies me in some way, shape, or form, and what rights do you have to take that information from me and keep it? Do you need to keep a copy as a notary? You're not going to keep a copy of the evidence of identity, although for employer business reasons you might. And then when you talk about journals, what information do you put in that journal? Texas and some other places prohibit you from keeping Social Security numbers or a driver's license number or some other government identifying number. So you have to be careful. Ethics. I thought that was just for lawyers. No, notaries need ethics too. So I'm just talking about one. This is a competitor of mine, but they've done a fine job. So this is a group out of California called National Notary Association. So years ago, we were the first association in the country. We started in '55. They started back in '57 as the California Notary Association, and a few years later, it's national. They're the bigger world in the room, no matter where you go. They have presence all over the country, and we are some days bitter competitors, but we're also friends. We work together on common problems in the notary environment. And they have I think it's like 23 pages now, Code of Professional Responsibility. I remember when it first started, it was about 10 bullet points, but life has got much more complicated than it used to be, I could tell you. So this is a good thing. You can find it on their website. I don't know if they charge for it or not, but no, it's free, okay. But it's a good thing that you might want to take a look at someday. But we took a few quotes out of it. One is, promote recognized standards of professional service. And the other thing we say, this is an important part to me, is that the standards may contradict provisions of the state's notary law. I'm not, they said it themselves. I'm not saying this, but it is an issue that you get your employer, even state-appointed authorities will put information on their websites that actually contradict what their own law says. So you have to be careful. You have to know your law. There's a little slide on that here a little bit. So as we say here in my notes, these things aren't addressed in notary laws. They're not law. They're good business practices. It's a common sense approach to this profession, to being a notary public. Take a look at that sometime. You'll learn a lot. It's very interesting. By the way, I have a handout. Where's the young man that was sitting in the front here? But I have a paper copy of these slides that everybody can get a copy of if somebody wants to pass them around there up by the projector, because you never know when the lights are going to go out. So I talk in the dark too. So people told me I've been in the dark for years, so I might as well talk in the dark. But I've given you a copy of the slide presentation, and you'll see that these are the laws. If you're not familiar, you can go to your state website, or just go to Google, and you can Google them. It'll give you the laws that you need to know for your particular state, the rules of the road that are important to you. you need to pay attention to them, please. We'll talk a little bit more about some of it later on. The next slide I have talks about ethical dilemmas. And so these are from then, the first part of this is from the Virginia Handbook. They don't have Verlona, but they have good common sense here where it says the Virginia notary may refuse to serve. As other folks have talked about, and maybe the next person will talk about, you may refuse to serve. And there it is in their handbook. In the Maryland Handbook, again, you may refuse to serve. And there's a whole, I could go on forever on competence. Somebody else mentioned, competence of the customer and capacity. Do they have the capacity to understand? Are they competent? I have to go to another little Ron story for a second because it's personal to me and it needs to mean something to you. How do you know whether somebody really wants to appear in front of you and sign something? Does mom want to sign away her house? Or does the soon-to-be ex-wife want to sign away her rights to property or to her husband's pension or whatever it might be? Because bad things happen to good people, I can tell you. One of the selling points of Ron was that now you're going to have a video of this whole transaction, or maybe part of the transaction, because some people want 3 minutes and some people want 30 minutes or even longer. It's very complicated, it really is. But the theory is that because it's on video, nobody's going to lie, right? Because, it's on video. That's funny, I told it to my younger brother who works with me on another side of our business, and he said, what do you mean? That video? It doesn't scare anybody. Every night on the news, I see some idiot at a 7-Eleven or a gas station who runs in, points a gun at everybody, steals some candy bars or something, and runs back out the door again. And there he is. You ever hear the story about the guy who said, I can't make this stuff up, I really can't. I heard it, I think, from an FBI guy that said that if he sprayed himself with lemon juice, he'd be invisible. I can't make this up. So invisible, I'm pretty sure I saw them there. Anyway, so just because you see somebody on Ron video, does that mean they're telling the truth? Does that mean they're not under any pressure? So with Ron, when it first started, there was this whole big to-do about you have to have the customer in front of the camera. You take your cell phone maybe, you spread the cell phone behind you, make sure there's nobody else in the room so there's no undue influence on the customer. Because if it was a face-to-face transaction, well, you would see they bring the whole family in, but if you could tell if they're scaring mom or somebody much so, but when it's remote, how do you know? I'm here to tell you that's so much bunk. They actually talked about, did they have the gun to the head? Is there somebody behind the signer with a physical gun to their head? Really? Are you kidding? So I know somebody who was married for a long time. And that person's husband was a drunken, abusive idiot. Those were his good points, I can tell you. And look, my daughter-in-law is a psychology professor. My son is a psychoanalyst. I'm an amateur, but I'm an old-time amateur. I know what I know when I see things, and I can tell you that I know that this person who was in an abusive marriage for all those years learned how, if you excuse the expression, learned how to play poker. She will come to you, and you ask her, is she under any pressure? Is she lying? Is she telling the truth? You ask her. She learned a long time ago how to keep a poker face. This is very serious now, because she knew when her husband asked her a question, if she looked wrong, if she said the wrong word, if she moves the wrong direction, she was going to be verbally or physically abused. And it's very sad because they never got over it. I've never got over my parents either, but that's another story. So, but people don't. This stuff is very sad. So, gun to the head, well, not necessarily. In fact, I asked our underwriters, our bond and insurance underwriters, I said, when have you ever had a claim when the signer said, I was forced to sign because somebody had, I can't make this up right, a gun to their head? And he said, that's a good question. And they called me a week later and said, well, we had one case in Michigan. One case in like 100 years, right? So it doesn't really happen. But the emotional distress does happen all of the time, especially the divorces and the wills and other things like that. When in doubt, don't serve them. Let's see here. we'll get back to that maybe. I'm watching the clock. I'm trying to anyway. I may be here at 6 o'clock. I apologize. Okay, legal penalties and liabilities. The Virginia Handbook has a conversation about this. They don't have the national law, but they have a lot of good sense here. The Maryland regulations have information. How are you going to get punished? What's going to happen to you? What about administrative? Let's go to the next slide here. What about administrative actions which can be taken against you? Just a few ideas for you. Our state publishes a list every month of notaries who do something wrong. Don't know if your state does or not. Different states do different things. In our state, you can get fined up to $1,000 for doing something wrong for each action as a notary. In Michigan, it's $10,000, and it's going to be changed in Pennsylvania eventually, also to $10,000. And our association has no problem with that. We don't want bad notaries. That's fine. So what could happen? Why are people getting fined or having something? They don't keep a chronological journal. They don't keep control of their stamp. Years ago, actually got a patent for what's called a stamp guard. This little piece of stainless steel at the bottom of this, right? You can't use this thing. You can punch this into your blow to face. It's not going to work. Some people copied this and then they just got rid of it after that. So I'm not the only one in the country who sells this. I woke up one morning and had another idea in the shower. The only peace and quiet I get. What can I say? Every one of our members gets one of these. If they're a new notary, they get one of these stamp guards as part of their package of equipment. And so there's stamp guards in one place, the key's somewhere else. Who's using your stamp right now? What's your employer doing with it? It's Saturday, so what? What, your employer doesn't have a key to his own office or her own office? We could talk about many stories about this. There are administrative penalties. We have notaries who get their commission suspended for 12 months. You want to tell your employer you just got suspended? Why are you working there anyway? Because you're the notary. No, not any longer. One of the things that we have in Pennsylvania that I would suggest to your state is remedial notary education. A long time ago, the chief counsel for the Secretary of State's office, my buddy John T. Henderson Jr., never forget John, nice guy, and John said, Mark, could we send notaries to your class who've been bad notaries for remedial education? In those days, it was a 6-hour class that we were teaching. It was $35 to go to the class. And I said, sure, John, why not? And I am still the only vendor in Pennsylvania the Secretary of State sends bad notaries to. We get about 35 notaries a year who are forced to go to our classes. Now it's $100 out of their pocket. It's still a 6-hour class. It's not me talking anymore. I got young men, young ladies who do it for me, but it's a good idea. In fact, I got Montana to start that when I was talking to a friend of ours up there some years ago. So there's all kinds of administrative penalties that can occur as a notary. They vary from state to state, and we don't have any problem with any of them, all things considered. Suspension, revocation, you could have civil penalties, criminal penalties. As I mentioned before, if you impersonate a notary, how can a notary impersonate a notary? It's kind of a weird question. We've had notaries public. I just had one the other day again, old notary to Boy Scout. I wouldn't make this stuff up. So she got herself reappointed as a notary, and she's been stamping like mad for the last 3 years. Except what? Except she's been using the old stamp that expired 3 years ago. We also get notaries public who don't go get sworn back in again because they don't realize they had to for whatever reason. And so now they've been acting as a notary for the last 2 or 3 years, and they wake up one morning and all of a sudden realize for some reason, usually because somebody else at a place of employment gets appointed, and they say, oh, Mary Jane, I just went and got sworn in, whatever the procedure is. And I said, I don't remember doing that. I did that once. Do I have to do it again? Yes, you have to do it again for every 4 years, every 8 years, whatever it might be. And then they got the big question about, well, what about all those documents that were, excuse the expression, notarized when Mary Jane wasn't a notary? Egads. Can you spell lawyer in court and stuff like that? So it'll be up to the court. Usually most of that stuff lives because nobody challenges it because they don't know to challenge it. But it could be a problem at some stage of the game, and every court will rule differently depending on, by the facts of the case and so on. Oh, that last little thing there says professional sanctions for censure or disbarment. We don't talk about notaries like that's lawyers. And again, I know I probably made a few lawyers in the room mad already about talking about lawyers, but I will tell you, if you talk to a lawyer I know in our Secretary of State's office, they will tell you they have more problems with lawyers who are also notaries than any other notaries in the state. Because how much education do lawyers get in law school? About 30 seconds worth maybe the first year, and that's it. No disrespect meant here. They just don't get much education on it, and it gets to be a problem. It really does. Let's see here. Understanding the penalties. I think I talked about that. So let's go to the next one. Mitigation. Know your law and regulations. Follow the law and regulations. There's one thing to be able to recite chapter and verse. It's another thing to actually pay attention to what you've learned. I spent my whole life in school trying to figure that out. Keep the journal. I brought a journal with me. Every state has some different rules and so forth. As an example, for instance, we don't require signatures in our journal. Many states do. Good idea, bad idea, don't know, but it's an idea. So there are many different requirements. Probably the most interesting one in the country has always been fingerprints. California requires, for certain types of real estate transactions, that you put your fingerprint in there. It's always been a sore point for me because I know that if I'm a bad guy, you're not going to be able to read that fingerprint when I get done. Because when I put it in there, I'm going to twist that baby a little bit. And besides, what are you going to call? You're going to call our friends who are still his friend who are still working at the FBI and say, hey, would you run this print for me? Right. So because I do a lot of different things, because notaries are involved, I've actually was involved in a fingerprint startup. I know a guy who has a patent on a fingerprint. So I've actually know a little bit about fingerprinting. A little bit, enough to be dangerous. And I know it's really hard to get a good print, especially from a bad guy who doesn't want you to have a good print. So good luck with that. They actually did fingerprinting in Cook County, Illinois for 15 years because they had real property transfer problems. They had deed theft, property theft, call it what you want to call it. And then all of a sudden, one day, I don't make these stories up, one day the law didn't exist anymore. Something came to my mind, and it's like, it's not there. What's called sunsetted. It expired. And so I called somebody I know in Illinois and said, what happened to the law? You had it for 15 years. You had a little special piece of paper to fill out and all this stuff. He said, well, we forgot to renew it again. That's it. They just forgot to give it to the legislature to redo it again. And I said, are you going to? He said, nah, we're not going to do it anymore. Which told me what? It didn't have any effect at all. But I don't make these stories up. These things happen. Know the laws, follow them, keep a journal, and when in doubt, ask for guidance. One of the advantages of having a notary association, we answer up to a few hundred calls a day from our members how to do their job. Understand the difference between being a notary and a lawyer. You're not. Most of you aren't. I'm not either. I get accused of being one. My own attorney probably wouldn't be real happy with some things I've said on the phone some days, but you need to behave yourselves, please. As we say here, every state except Arizona has a UPL provision in their law. Your bar association will not be happy with you giving legal advice. Nothing authorizes you to prepare documents, especially, well, I won't go to the details. There's no time. Under authorized practice of law. If you're not an attorney, you can't do something that you can't do. You don't put together wills and powers of attorney and other things that the public wants you to do. You just don't do it. And we're going to hit on this again on another slide. The next slide talks about identifying boundaries of guidance. This is a sore point with me, I can tell you. We all teach now, well, it is a sore point with me, I'm sorry. Jackie's falling off her chair back there, but it is. Customer comes in front of you and they want something notarized. And I'm going to take a look at it and I'm going to say, well, you probably want to swear that it's a beautiful sunny day here in Maryland, because I think an oath is really what you want to do. An acknowledgement doesn't have the same kind of effect. I get yelled at if I say that now, because now the concept is that the notary doesn't tell the customer what they should be doing. The notary can tell the customer that, well, you could swear that it's a beautiful day, or I could take an acknowledgement of your signature But you need to tell me as a notary which one of these two you want me to do. It just rubs me the wrong way because, again, the average civilian only sees a notary once in a blue moon and has no idea what you and I are talking about today and how are they going to pick it. And I feel a moral and ethical obligation to help them because I don't know where the document's going to go when it leaves my office. I don't need to know or care, but I want to make sure that it's good for the purposes that it's been executed. And I don't think I'm giving good service, but I get yelled at every time I give that little speech, so I won't give it again. Not until next time, anyway. Recognizing common scenarios. Why do they come? I mentioned this before. They come to you because they think you could do illegal documents, because they've come from a country where this is very common. They come to you because they want to save money, because you're $5 or $10 or $6 or even $25 for a RON transaction is less expensive than paying my attorney who might charge $100, which is fine. That's what they charge. But so they want to come to you because they think they want to save money. All they're going to do is spend money in the end when the whole deal goes belly up. The customer wants your advice. What should I do in this situation? Jeez, guys, I'm not a lawyer. I walked past the law school once, right? Just because I bought my clothes at Brooks Brothers doesn't make me any smarter. I'm not a lawyer. What to do in a dispute? There are people who do this for a living. It's not what you do. Or just stamp and sign this puppy because they want you to stamp the document because what? It makes it more legal. It makes it more official. Somehow it makes it better for some reason. That's what the public thinks, and it doesn't. Just because you stamp or seal your document doesn't make it more legal. Bad English, but you get the idea. Strategies for handling strange and wonderful situations. Rolona actually says now in the law, now even Virginia that doesn't have Rolona, I'm sure would agree with this, that if you're not an attorney and you're supposed to post a disclaimer that says you're not an attorney. Probably it's hard to find this anywhere, but nevertheless, the law does require, if you're practicing, to make sure you inform your customers that you are not an attorney and you cannot give legal advice. And if you advertise on the website, which a lot of you do now, the same thing, there are things you can't do. Things you're authorized to do and things you are not authorized to do. And by the way, just for a second, I need to talk about that. You wear many different hats. There is now what is called the gig economy. So you could be an Uber driver and deliver food. There are a lot of things you could do. I have a list here in front of me. I'm not going to read it all. But you could be, there's a lady in Philadelphia, she teaches classes on how to be an apostille agent, whatever that all means. You could be something called a field inspector. You could do fingerprinting. You could be a personal concierge. Something called a remote testimony witness, whatever that means. A virtual assistant. The newest thing out is a certified trust delivery agent. For the lawyers in the room, you should worry about some of these things. You have notaries doing things which they're probably not qualified or have no legal foundation behind them, but they're doing them anyway. You have to remember when you're acting as a notary and when you're not acting as a notary public, there is a difference. What does the law say and what does it not say? Best practices for record keeping. Again, we talked about the journal already, and some other folks have. I suspect the next speaker is going to talk about it also. So I think we're going to go over that, except for this. I'm sorry, I could go on all night. But this just happened, again, twice. I made up a rule a long time. You've heard Murphy's Law? Well, we have Aronson's rule in my office. I made up the rule because I'm Aronson, right? And the rule is this. If something hasn't happened in a really long time, if it happens once, it'll happen again very shortly. And so over the last week, I had a claim from somebody who said that a notary had overcharged on their fees. What did they do? They did a signing. And they got paid, what, $125, $150, $175 to do, right? Go to somebody's house, do a closing. The lady who bought or sold the property added up all the little notarizations in that package. There's only a few of them. And she decided that she was overcharged by, $100 or so. So she approached a law firm in downtown Pittsburgh, and now they've filed a class action suit against 17 notaries public, saying the notaries are overcharging. Really? And one of the problems is, so I asked the first lady, one of our members, for a copy of her journal. In your journal, we have 2 columns. One column is for your notary fee. In my state, generally $5. Squeeze my seal, stamp my seal, $5. And there's another column for the clerical fees. The notary in this case had some kind of a fancy computerized thing, and it said $175. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but when I look at this, I'm going to say, look, you wrote it $175, so you must have charged $175 as a notary. Now, you and I know that ain't true, excuse me, bad English, but that's what it appears to be. So now our friends at Pearson Associates are going after a whole bunch of notaries public, and because they think they're overcharging as a notary because the public doesn't understand why, how, and when you charge. Make good entries in your journals, please. Be careful, the public doesn't understand your job. Security measures. I talked about my little stamp clamp, as we used to call it. Not calling it stamp guard, but call it what you want. We actually sell, back in our association, we sell a lockable banker's bag that you could put your journal in. Yeah, you could take a razor blade and go through it, but look, at least you make an honest effort. Or if you have a place where you work, you put in a lockable file cabinets somewhere. But I can't tell you how many members we've had over the years that were, again, signing agents usually, or some type of a mobile notary that had all their stuff in a briefcase. Briefcases in the back of the car. They run into 7-Eleven for a slushie, and they come back out, and their briefcase is gone, and their stamp and seal and journal and money and receipt book, and their documents, which have a lot of personally identifiable information on them. It's a big mess. Make sure that you keep everything under control, please. Lots of security. This is just a little thing. This comes from the old poem, Desiderata. Speak your truth quietly and clearly when you're speaking to your... I thought it was kind of interesting. Listen to your customer. This is what folks were talking about before me. Do they really understand what they're doing? Do they want to be there today? Do they know what a signature means? Do they know what date it is? Do they know who the president is, right? Listen to them. Exercise caution again and again and again. And be gentle. They don't know what you do. They don't understand. Sometimes you do have to refuse to serve. Sometimes you must refuse to serve them, but be nice about it. Be polite. Let's talk about insurance and bonding for a second because we haven't, because nobody else has yet today, so I need to talk about it. In the District of Columbia, you're required to have a $2,000 surety bond. In Virginia and Maryland, you don't have a bond. Let's talk about what a bond does for a second. I am not a licensed insurance agent. I'm not selling anything, but we started our business in Pittsburgh in the surety business, the bonding business, in 1885. That accounts for all my white hair, right? I've been around for a long time. And then we got into the insurance business, which I'll talk about next. When a notary has a bond, what does that bond do? That bond protects your customer. So I do something wrong as a notary in the District of Columbia. I get sued because, as I mentioned, only for the rest of your life you could be sued. It's right, it rolls against me, and it says, Mark, you did something wrong. You owe young Jackie there $2,000. You cost it, right? And I go, what? I don't know stinking $2,000, right? I just used to work for Billy Bob here. He paid me $1.90. I don't have $2,000. In fact, when you hear on the news, that's something I saw just recently. Somebody said that most Americans don't have, like $450 for an emergency. They're living from paycheck to paycheck. And I have $2,000 to pay Jackie? Nice knowing you, Jackie. Bye. So what happens is, I'm not making this up, what happens is the way this works is the bonding company will pay my aggrieved party. They're going to pay Jackie the $2,000, but guess what? That's not a gift. I am not off the hook as a notary. I may no longer be employed. I may be retired. Too bad. I have to pay the bonding company back. It may be $25 a month. I'm not being funny now. This is what happens. $10 a month or some little amount, but I'm responsible to pay the bond. You are responsible to your full net worth. Now, you could have, instead, errors and omissions insurance, E&O. A lot of professionals have liability. Lawyers have liability insurance. Title agents have liability insurance. Many professionals have liability insurance. In our office, we sell 3 different versions of it, actually 4. We sell notary E&O at a $30,000, $50,000, or $100,000 level, and we sell a signing agent E&O, starting at $100,000, going up to $1 million. Not very cheap, but if you really need it, we could go up to $1 million. E&O protects the notary. It protects you as a notary. So if I have an E&O policy and Jackie sues me and I owe her $2,000, right? The E&O carrier, the underwriter, the insurance company, they'll provide a lawyer to defend me. And when I lose the case, they will pay Jackie the $2,000, and I don't have to pay her back. Because, it's like if you have insurance for your car or your house, if the insurance company pays out, you don't have to pay them back, right? It's the same kind of thing. And the E&O protects the bond. So if you're in D.C., you have a bond, you have E&O. When the claim comes down, the claim goes first against the E&O. It never touches that bond, unless, of course, it's more than the value and all this sort of stuff. So that's the difference between the two. And you can purchase, not only for me, but many other folks on the internet, E&O insurance to help protect yourself as a notary public. Just a few things here. Stay up to date. The Maryland regulations tell you that you need to keep track of everything you're doing and keep yourself educated. There are resources for you. Again, you can go to the different places here for the Secretary of State's and the State Appointing Authority's website. You could also go to different trade associations on the internet. I do need to make one little comment here. I don't mean to insult anybody now, but please be careful of Facebook. Yeah. Thank you. Say it again. Please be careful of Facebook. Yeah. Look, there are 3 old brick and mortar notary associations in this country. Myself, folks from California, and the lady from Florida who actually started here. Eugene Hines and his wife started as a lawyer in D.C., and that eventually went. There's 2 brothers that own an association in Texas, American Association of Notaries. There are a few little, small, quasi-state associations around the country, but what we're seeing now is a lot of virtual notary associations on Facebook. If you go to Facebook for your notary education, please be careful to whom you listen and what you think you learn. These folks, they all mean well. I wish them well. They grow their business, so forth and so on. But many of them haven't been around too long. They have not participated in the national programs that the traditional folks have participated in. They didn't help put together Rolona. They don't know much about Ron sometimes. And a lot of these fine details that we talk about. So just please be careful of what you're doing. And I think the last slide I have is this one before I get the hook here, although I have all kinds of other cool claims I could talk about. Anyway, I'm an old Boy Scout, I like to say. Never became an Eagle Scout. I couldn't swim. I still can't swim. I don't even take baths. I'm afraid of, it's like anything lower than a foot's too bad. So as a notary, however, I think it applies, right? Be trustworthy. The public comes to you because they trust you really to protect them from perfect strangers. Be loyal to your customers, your employer, and to the state that appoints you. Be helpful to your customers, but don't practice law. Be friendly and be courteous, and be kind to especially your older customers maybe, or to new immigrants who don't understand exactly what you're permitted to do. Be obedient to the appointed authority. Be cheerful when they have their dog chewing on your leg when you're trying to do a closing for them, or some of the other stories I've heard over the years. You're not getting paid much as a notary, so you have to be thrifty. Sometimes you have to be brave in some of the environments that you're in. Be clean. Years ago when the signing agent business started, I know the people who started this out of Colorado a long time ago. There's a long story. They used to actually teach notaries how to dress. So when I say be clean, I'm not being funny. People are more relaxed now. But when you show up, be professional, look professional, and all things considered, be reverent. And that's as much time as I had because I probably overdid my time by about 10 minutes. But thank you for inviting me down for this little conversation. I am going to run back after the last presentation today. It's a 4-hour drive home. I won't get home till about midnight. It's a long drive. And I think I have to cut the grass tomorrow or do something like that. So hey, it's the weekend, you know, and I have emails to answer too. There's always work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's only been 51 years. Maybe I'll see you next year when it's been 52 years, and I'll learn something new to talk to you about. Thank you very much.